Hello, everyone. Welcome to 1.5 Degrees, the podcast where together we explore the science, solutions, and stories involved in the fight against climate change. I'm your host, Heidi Pan, speaking with the professionals behind the latest research, policies, culture, and innovations shaping our response to global environmental challenges. For today's episode, we are incredibly fortunate to be joined by Molly Morabito, who is a climate organizer at the Center for Biological Diversity's Climate Law Institute, mobilizing for a rapid, just, and equitable transition off fossil fuels and supporting campaign and coalition work to obtain science-based, progressive climate actions from the federal government. Prior to joining the Center team, Molly was a senior research associate at the Berkeley Lab, working to increase the adoption of clean energy technologies across the federal sector. She has also previously worked on clean energy and climate advocacy in positions held at the Environmental Defense Fund, Citizens Climate Lobby, Alliance to Save Energy, the U.S. Senate, and more. Molly is now a lead coordinator for the Center for Biological Diversity's work to stop the Willow project through the People versus Fossil Fuels Coalition and works closely with Sovereign Inupiat for a Living Arctic, or SILA, the frontline group leading the fight to stop Willow. Thank you so much, Molly, for joining us today. It's truly an honor.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
For some context, can you briefly explain what exactly the Willow project is and why it's imperative we fight it?
Yeah, absolutely. The Willow project was a proposed project by ConocoPhillips for a massive expansion of oil drilling infrastructure in Alaska's Western Arctic, which is a region that has already faced a lot of fossil fuel development and sees a lot of the impacts from climate change at a much higher rate than the rest of the nation. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the so-called US, and has seen just massive build out of oil and gas drilling. Willow was the latest one and is really taking it up a whole notch. It was a proposed 5 drill sites originally, which would have had massive emissions, but really any amount of drill sites at this stage in the climate emergency is going to be catastrophic for our ability to stay under 1.5 and avoid catastrophic levels of warming. So this project has been opposed by some members of the indigenous community in the nearby village of Nixit, and the Sovereign Inupiat for Living Arctic, SILA, is a group that has been opposing the project for many years, fighting against it and speaking out against the harmful impacts of fossil fuel pollution in Alaskan communities. Not all indigenous communities oppose the project. There are some who have been in favor of the expansion because of what the industry has said would be economic benefits for the area. But in general, there are a lot of groups on the ground where the project will be built who have opposed it from the beginning. And the Biden administration, it was the ultimate decision maker here. The Department of Interior reviewed the project and assessed it for its environmental and climate impacts. And on February 1st, issued the final environmental impact statement, which basically outlined the fact that this was going to be a climate damaging project and recommended phasing it down to 3 drill sites instead of 5, but talked a little bit about how this was going to be a problem that they assessed, but ultimately didn't move forward with recommending the project be stopped altogether, which is, of course, what climate, environmental justice, and conservation groups have been advocating for, based on the fact that we can't afford any new fossil fuel infrastructure if we want to have any hope of staying under 1.5. So that was a disappointing result from the Department of Interior, but that release of the impact statement kicked off a 30-day waiting period during which a lot of groups mobilized, led by SILA and joined by conservation, environmental justice, and climate groups around the country to push back on the administration and really put the decision where it always has been, which is Biden's desk, because Biden had the ability to ultimately make the approval or reject the project altogether. So yeah, that's kind of the history of the project. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what happened during that 30-day waiting period and the incredible response we saw from folks across the US opposing this project.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I mean, I would love to go into that now. In terms of like who were the big actors, I guess, in this 30-day period, what was really crucial, like that you like what were the crucial steps that were needed to be taken in this 30-day period? And I guess also to go into like why in terms of like and also like in detail, I guess the effects that local communities in this area would be like facing if this project were like and the project has like in being approved and such.
Yeah, so in terms of the impacts of the project itself, there's obviously on a large scale, there's the climate impacts. The project as it stands with the somewhat scaled down version will still add about 260 million metric tons of carbon emissions into the atmosphere over the next 30 years. So that's
And
the
that's
equivalent.
oh
Oh,
yeah,
sorry?
no. Oh no, and that where is that like methane or carbon emission like coming from?
That will be from the result of the production that happens when they build out this site. So it's expanding infrastructure, it's building um, new new fossil fuel extraction infrastructure, and it's adding three new drill sites into that region of the Arctic. And it was originally proposed as a way to as a hub for fossil fuel development in the Arctic and opening up the more of the region to fossil fuel production, and it was going to be routed through that area, and that could still happen. The president did shortly following this decision or slightly preceding it, knowing that he was facing some serious political pressure, um, made an announcement that his administration would commit to keeping the rest of the Arctic off limits for oil and gas extraction and new drilling. But the president promised that on his campaign trail as well, no new drilling on federal lands or waters. And yet, under his watch, there has been a ton more drilling on public lands and waters, more lease sales than we saw even under the Trump administration. So we don't know that we can really take that promise as it stands. What we do know is that he approved new fossil fuel drill sites, which means the equivalent of nearly 70 coal-fired power plants operating for a year with these 30 years of production that is been evaluated and projected for this project. So that's just really going to cause irreparable harm to the environment, Arctic wildlife like polar bears, ringed seals, bearded seals, who are all protected under the Endangered Species Act. Um, and then there's impacts on the community of Nixit as well. Obviously, fossil fuel production causes at the site causes air pollution. It can lead to leaks into water supply. And there's signs already that the toxins from fossil fuel development in that part of the Arctic have seeped into the plant life
Mm.
that the caribou herd in that region depends on. And the caribou are essential for subsistence living for the local community. So there's risk, obviously, when you impact wildlife and the natural ecosystem of an area that impacts the communities in the area as well. Not to mention then, of course, the direct harms from breathing polluted air from the extraction site.
Yeah, no, it's so difficult. Like I remember when I like first heard that the Willow Project was approved, that it felt like such a betrayal on the part of the administration, partly like majorly because there was so much messaging during the campaigning about how like we need to stop drilling, which is true, we do need to stop drilling. Um, what are the steps that the Center of Biological Diversity is taking alongside other organizations following this recent decision? And what is your role in that work?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that I just want to name is that, yes, you're absolutely right. This decision was a betrayal from the administration and from Biden, who made these promises to win people's votes, who wanted him to be a climate president, and he promised to be one. And yet we've seen his administration greenlighting fossil fuel expansion, which is just completely contradictory to what climate science tells us we need at this moment. Not only do we need to not be approving new projects, we actually should be moving towards phasing out existing production altogether. And the administration is very far from that. So it is absolutely a betrayal. And I just want to stress that this fight is not over. The company, ConocoPhillips, that's behind this project is definitely going to move as quickly as they can to try to break ground and start construction. They only have around 3 weeks left in the season when they can actually do this work before it just becomes too warm for them to work on. Actually, that's one of the crazy parts about Willow. They were part of the plan was in constructing giant chillers so they could refreeze the permafrost that's melting because of climate change so that they could construct a drill site in the Arctic.
Oh my gosh.
So that's a factor in construction. It will delay the time that they can start the project. We, the center, along with some other groups, are suing over the Willow project because of the species that it threatens, which, as I said, are protected under the Endangered Species Act. So there's legal standing there, as well as failure to consider other climate harms from approving this project. So we're currently in a lawsuit. CELA is also leading a lawsuit. There's 2 lawsuits filed, and this will be going to the courts. So we're fighting it there. Unfortunately, we filed an emergency injunction to prevent ConocoPhillips from breaking ground on this project until the court had looked at our case, and the judge denied that. So that's a really disappointing step, but we will still be fighting this, and they can't get that far into the construction process with the season changing. So there are many years to fight this, and we will continue to push back. The other piece, alongside the fact that we have legal avenues available and are pursuing those, is the fact that Biden can still withdraw the record of decision and submit a new one, and has the power to direct his Department of Interior to do this, provided they give an explanation for their change in the position. That's what it takes. So here it could be that the ROD, or the record of decision, was issued without sufficient environmental review, and that there's new information from the IPCC's latest synthesis report to take into consideration. And the Biden administration has done this before. They've withdrawn RODs and issued new ones for Arctic-related oil and gas activity in the past. So there's precedent, and the pressure that we saw from so many individuals, especially young people around the country in that 30-day waiting period before the president issued his decision, if that pressure stays on and doesn't go away, there's a chance that we can force the president's hand and make him walk back this decision, which has already been very politically costly for his administration, because it just doesn't make sense. It's just such a stark contrast to what is demanded by the science, demanded by communities impacted by this decision, demanded by millions, literally millions of people who've heard about Willow and think it's abhorrent, and what the president himself promised to do.
Yeah, no, it's quite like, I mean, we did touch on this already, but like it is like such a contradictory act on the part of this administration. And also the detail that you mentioned about like how ConocoPhillips is doing this project is just, the whole of it is so ironic. The fact that they have to, like, they're including like they're factoring in global warming, like in the sense that like the ice is melting and then they have to refreeze it. That's really mind-boggling. So in all of this, it is quite hard. I think like it's really incredible that you are persisting in this fight, and it's really inspiring to see. There is like a sense of, I guess, like growing disillusionment, like in among people that are like it's quite a setback, I feel, for many, and it's definitely, I guess what is one piece of advice that you might have for those who are like concerned but feel disillusioned about political processes?
That's a great question. I feel that a lot as an organizer and someone who's been pushing for these solutions for a long time and have seen, you know, sometimes part of organizing means you get handed heavy losses. I think like the reality is the political norm is to approve these projects because we have a system that is dependent on fossil fuels, and we have fossil fuel executives who have exerted their influence for decades, have misinformed the public, have pushed false narratives about how we need fossil fuels and that they're not actually harming the planet, and have used their money and influence to gain access to government and capture government in many ways that makes it incredibly hard to overcome. So it is kind of a David and Goliath thing. The fossil fuel industry is very powerful.
Mm.
And yet we as the people still have power over our government. And there are moments where that's enough to turn the tide, especially if rather than give up when we're handed a defeat like this, we persist and we come back stronger the next time. Because I think what this administration will be thinking, the calculation that I think they made, obviously none of us know for sure, was that yes, they were going to get a ton of blowback, much more blowback than they were expecting, by the way. None of us were really expecting Stop Willow to go viral the way it did. That is an exciting new development that I think could be a sign that public perception around the role of fossil fuels specifically is shifting. Because normally when we've talked about climate change and federal action and government action, the conversation has really been dominated by the solutions we need to invest in clean energy and kind of the demand side policy options that will shift demand towards clean energy and make those solutions more affordable and more accessible, which is definitely an essential part of the equation. But the other side of the equation is stopping fossil fuel supply. And that is something that really the federal government is the best poised to do. The private sector can come in and do a lot of the R&D that we need to and deliver a lot of the clean energy solutions that we need. The federal government is there to provide investment to make sure that it's affordable and gets to the communities that need it most. But with fossil fuel supply, because all of these projects, many of these projects at many stages of development require oftentimes multiple federal permits from multiple federal agencies, that gives the government, and specifically Biden, executive authority over all of it. And then the production that is currently happening on our public lands and waters, which make up about a quarter of our national emissions, like oil and gas that we're drilling and extracting on our public lands and waters, which the president has authority over, that can be stopped. Similarly, it's just an ordinary presidential power to issue a demand for phasing out that production and controlling that production on public lands and waters. So the levers are there. And what needs to happen to drive that is just people demanding it from every corner of the country, making sure that Biden hears loud and clear that they see what he's doing or what he's not doing, and they're not gonna accept it. And the leverage we have is, of course, we have the election, but we also have direct action and protests. We can show up in the streets. We can, take action that demonstrates like we're serious about this demand and that we are not going to take the build out of fossil fuel infrastructure anymore because it's costing us our lives and it's costing us our future. And I think that I was really, as disappointing and bitterly devastating as this Willow decision was, what I see as the silver lining is just that outpouring of support to stop the project and people making that connection really clearly to Biden, really clearly, saying like you broke your promise and naming that. And what I hope to see is that those people who took action on the Stop Willow campaign will continue to take action on every other federal fossil fuel fight that's coming down the chute, because there will be more.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of regions in the US and a lot of communities that are at the front lines of fossil fuel pollution and fighting it. And they need that same amount of support and energy for their fights too.
Yeah, no, you touched on so many important things. It's really like the fact that there are levers in place. I really like that analogy that you used, to be able to like stop this like project and future projects down the line. And it's just really about like the power of the people in terms of like trying to get the people who are at the lever to stop it. And it's like I similarly felt like while I was incredibly disheartened, I also similarly found a lot of hope in the like seeing so many people like so energized against this. That was really inspiring. And I think like it I guess it says something about how social media has come to be a big help in the climate movement. But at the same time, there are I feel like some interesting bits of discourse that are also going on. And I guess I do want to also go into some questions about like your career and how you got into this field. But before that, like you mentioned how this is about like a supply issue, how we really need to stop the supply. Um, there are like arguments that are saying like there the issue is that there is a demand for oil. So I guess like in terms of like federal policy, what are some key steps that you think are needed and hope to see the federal government take in the next few years, like in addition to, stopping new fossil fuel projects in accelerating transition to clean energy and, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels?
Yeah, I guess I want to say we definitely at the center, we are not saying that demand side investments in clean energy are not needed. And those solutions do need to come from federal
Mm.
government. We absolutely advocate for that. Our energy justice program is led on our campaigns to help envision and put forward solutions for what a truly just and resilient new clean energy system would look like. Because it's true, it's not, there is demand for fossil fuels and we can't make this switch overnight. We have to have careful policies in place and make sure that no one's left behind. And we have a plan for making sure that people still have affordable, reliable energy supply. It's just
Yeah.
that in the dominant climate narrative, I think the focus has been on that first. And I think, and in a way, rightly so, like it's good to kick that off by putting those investments in clean energy and making sure we truly have the technologies at scale and at the right affordability level to be deployed right away. And then we can start kind of phasing out the supply. But I feel like at this moment, we saw the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. Clean energy has been growing more and more affordable and more scaled, even without that government action
Mhm.
for a decade now. And we're at this tipping point where it is time to start turning to fossil fuels. And it's certainly, at least, not make the problem any worse, which is what these new approvals of these new projects has been doing. So, in addition to what I've mentioned around denying federal permits for any new fossil fuel infrastructure and starting to get serious about a managed decline of existing production on public lands and waters, which is under, the federal government's authority to control, the president can also declare a national climate emergency, which would unlock additional powers to his ordinary powers, called emergency powers, obviously, that would allow him to also direct more additional government investment into deploying renewable technologies and particularly looking towards electrifying transportation, making sure there's EV charging infrastructure accessible. There could be more investments in high speed rail. So, again, the demand for oil and gas could decrease. The president has more he can do there. The just signing the IRA isn't where it ends, even though that seems to be what the administration
Yeah.
thinks, that their job's done because they
Mm.
signed the IRA. There's so much more the president can do through executive authority,
Mhm.
um, on both the fossil fuel supply side, but also on the clean energy build out.
Mm.
And the emergency powers, I won't get into them all, but there's a lot more beyond that.
Yeah.
There's stuff he can do to restrict fossil fuel investments abroad. He can reinstate the crude oil export ban, which Congress overturned in 2015, and that would stop our export of crude oil. So there's fossil fuel supply pieces and clean energy demand side pieces within the emergency powers he could unlock by declaring a national climate emergency. So that's a important step that we want to see from this administration.
And I guess like, is there anything preventing him from declaring a national climate emergency? Is my question.
There's not, no. And there's precedent for presidents
Mm,
declaring national climate emergencies. And actually, the Biden came very close, or at least
mm,
that's what the press was reporting
mm,
back in July when the negotiations in Congress around Build Back Better had, been stymied again by Joe Manchin. And it looked
yeah.
like there was no legislative path for climate action. The White House was, according to all sources, seriously considering issuing that declaration because it
Mm,
understood that there's executive power, with that the president can use without Congress's authority or without Congress's approval. And then Manchin came back to the negotiation table with Schumer and Pelosi, and we got the IRA.
mm,
So yes, the president knows there's nothing stopping him from declaring a climate emergency. It's been done. He almost did it,
mm,
and he could do it. I think it really is just a question of like making him choose the people over fossil fuels.
mm.
And we do that by being as big and loud of a movement as we can possibly be, which means everyone getting involved and taking on a role and joining in. So yeah, I mean, just you asked before about what the center is also doing beyond Willow.
Mhm.
And a key part of that on the organizing front is building on this pressure on Biden and really escalating to have a powerful grassroots movement
Mm,
demanding that Biden take action on fossil fuels and keeping that ask front and center in the national media. And we have a key opportunity in September when the UN Secretary General is bringing global leaders together for a climate ambition summit in New York. And the price of entry, as announced by the Secretary General, is commitment to no new fossil fuel development. So, by that token alone, there's honestly Biden shouldn't be allowed in the room.
mm,
But assuming that he is, I think what we've been planning around is how can we make this a political moment to
mm,
not only demonstrate the domestic pressure that Biden's under, but the international pressure from our allies abroad who are asking us to stop oil and gas extraction because we're like the second largest oil and gas producer in
yeah.
the world, or the largest oil and gas producer, and the
Mhm,
second
mhm.
in coal. So we have a major role and we owe the world a lot. And I think September is another moment to really put Biden in the hot seat and demonstrate that Willow wasn't one and done. Like people know what's happening and they want more action on federal fossil fuels.
Yeah, no, I think like no, that's really thank you for those insights into the aspects of like what like the future means, or I guess like the next steps that are coming up. Um I guess like now I wanted to ask a question about like um what inspired you to pursue a career in clean energy and climate advocacy, and how did you like get started in this field, would you say?
Yeah, well, as far as I remember, as young as I can remember, I was very passionate about wildlife and nature and loved
Mm,
my time outdoors, deeply loved animals, still do. And that kind of naturally led me into environmental advocacy from a fairly young age. And as I learned more, and we had these, big seminal publications come out about what the climate crisis was looking like, and started to see, it was also linked to the extinction crisis and
mm,
threatening animal species and wildlife everywhere. It just felt like working on climate was essential, and that was the existential environmental crisis that we were facing. So I started working in clean energy research, and I realized that, there are a lot of great clean energy solutions out there and a lot of people implementing them. And I wasn't seeing the federal government stepping up to the plate in the way that is necessary. And despite having plenty of a whole menu of policy options available, as we just went through, and that's kind of what led me to get into organizing, because organizing is, to me, the option and the actions we have to shift what's politically possible and actually create the political will, because politicians are not going to do this on their own. We know that they're not.
Yeah.
I wish they were all out there doing what's right because it's right, but they're motivated by money, and they're motivated by keeping their position and not getting voted out of office. And that's really hard on one hand. And on the other hand, it means that when mass groups of people act together and show up in a big way with a clear demand, that can move the needle. And sometimes it even gets legislation passed and policy decisions made. And so I've been organizing now for several years. And to your earlier point around the disillusionment, I guess one thing I wish I could say to all the folks who took action on Willow, it's super real to feel that pain, and I don't think it goes away. It hasn't for me. And organizing is a lot of incremental steps. Sometimes you don't even get to see like tangibly the outcome of your actions, but because you're part of this broader movement, this broader tapestry that's fighting over time, things shift. And I've seen that in the last 10 years that I've been involved. It's just like, first of all, climate change was not talked about the way it is now. And it wasn't even an issue that a president would campaign on. And that's organizing. Really. I mean, like, it's grassroots pressure, and it's climate movements, it's frontline or communities and organizations pushing out the truth of what fossil fuels do. And over time that builds up, and I think it will win the things we need to win. It's frustrating that it doesn't happen faster. And the more of us there are, the faster things will go. But we have to keep trying, and we have to keep fighting.
Yeah, no, that was really incredibly well put. And I think it's like that's really great advice for anyone that's trying to like interested in pursuing a career in clean energy and in climate advocacy. I guess to close off, this is a question I've been asking everyone in this podcast. If you could turn back time, butterfly effects aside, what is one like bit of advice that you would give to your past self who is getting started in all of this?
I feel my path to organizing was a little bit circuitous. I kind of went into research first and then came into advocacy and organizing. I spent some time, thinking that lobbying and advocacy with elected officials was the key, and it's definitely still a really important part of the equation. But maybe I would have gone back and said, just start organizing earlier. Just skip all this and go right into it. But at the same time, I think that those experiences help me now and have given me a bit more of an understanding of like the landscape we're in and all the different pieces that fit together, because organizing alone is not a silver bullet. It's just an essential part of what's needed. There's a lot of ways that people can enter the climate movement and contribute in a meaningful way. And I hope that everyone will, when called, take action, because we do need a lot of numbers of people to get them to listen to us. But in the meantime, taking a job, working in implementing clean energy solutions, making sure the money in the IRA gets to the communities that need it the most, that's all really meaningful work. That's part of the climate pie, so to speak. And it's been cool to see a lot of my friends finding their way into the climate movement through professional opportunities and jobs. Like, you can be a full-time climate organizer now, which was not the case 10 years ago. So it's yeah, there's a lot of opportunities and there's no perfect way or perfect path, I guess. Maybe that would be my advice. But the key thing is to just get involved as soon as you can, because we need you.
Yeah, no, I think we really need all hands on deck in this movement. And like thank you so much for again the work that you do with the Center for Biological Diversity and like in organizing and campaigning. You're an inspiration to me. And I think that I guess so if listeners want to be involved with the work that you do or support like the fight against the Willow Project in any way, where can they get involved or follow along with the work that you do?
Yeah, I highly for Willow, I really highly recommend they um look up Sovereign and Upayat for a Living Arctic, SELA.
Mhm.
Um, I can send you the link for that webpage in a second, but that they're really the group that has led on this and will continue to lead on this fight. And they have a lot of resources around the impacts of Willow and what it means for their community. So I think it's yeah, always best practice to go to the group and the community that's most directly
Mhm.
impacted by the project. In terms of just broader fighting fossil fuels and pressuring Biden, People versus Fossil Fuels is the national coalition that I organize with through the center, and peopleversusfossilfuels.org is just our coalition website. We we do have like a way for individuals to sign up to take action with us, and then if you're a part of an organization, you can sign on to join the coalition and join our working groups and our general calls where we have updates from frontline fights around the country and coordinate efforts to fight fossil fuels at the national level.
That's really amazing. Thank you so much. And I will be sure to, I guess, I don't know where my fingers are pointing, but like I will be sure to link everything. And thank you so much again for your time and sharing this thoughts with me. It's really been an honor.
Thank you so much. I really, yeah, appreciate the conversation and your thoughtful questions. And yeah, thank you again for giving me an opportunity.